The secret sauce to Delicious in Dungeon is a perfect balance between epic coolness and preposterous silliness that must always stay in equilibrium for the show to work, like the saltiness of Skyfish wing chips balanced out with the sourness of the vinegar-based dipping sauce. And episode 22 demonstrates this balance with elegance. We're nearing the end of what is hopefully just the first of 2 seasons, and as we do, we emerge from a bit of a lull in animation quality and establish a new goal for the group to find and release the fabled winged lion that's imprisoned somewhere in the depths. So let's break down the animation and storytelling and compare it a bit to the manga along the way. This episode adapts chapters 47 and 48, and this is probably the most well-known chapter cover in the whole series online, for obvious reasons. And it has strong similarities to the Dryad episode 15 in that they're both directed by the less experienced Yuki Kawano. Both have storyboards from someone who's been a staple key animator at the studio for years, this time Masaru Sakamoto, for whom this is actually his first ever storyboard credit. And both are held together by significant amounts of key animation from recognizable people like Ichigo Kano. I don't know if this is an intentional connection somewhere in the lore, or if mangaka Ryoko Kui just conceptualized the races before deciding that there would actually be people from the so-called Eastern land, but everything from their names, these ultra-thick fluffy pancakes that Senshi is making here, even to his flat-bladed knife and the point grip that he uses to hold it, dwarves are kinda Japanese-ish. Senshi gives Yod way too big of a bite of this pancake for him to be able to handle, and the animators really didn't need to get so up close and personal with this chewing bit. We get to learn more about the Mad Mage, and I finally get to call him Thistle from now on instead of the Mad Mage, and they've added this glowy bloom effect to his eyes when they go all hourglass mode in this extreme close-up. Though this version of the moment from the manga shows his whole face and gives a better sense of his weirdly soft expression here. His sudden appearance is obviously threatening, but this expression shows a side of him that we've only just started to glimpse through Yod's story at breakfast. Thistle seems to still think of himself as a benevolent guardian, preserving the kingdom for the good of its citizens. They've been doing some really fun stuff with Izutsumi's pupils this entire time, and a good time to mention it is this cut where they go from normal slits to wide open as she remembers her deeply embarrassing house kitty phase. And as the Griffin approaches in this scene, you can see her ears involuntarily twitching in the background as she hears it in the distance. Laios's run cycles are always hilarious, and in this one his arms move in sort of opposite arcs to each other, which makes his gait feel lopsided. And this time Marcel gets to join in on the fun too. The animators managed to make the speed of this dive feel fluid but also startling at the same time with the timing of the frames. In this section the Griffin moves at mostly 8 frames per second, but as soon as it finishes kicking off this pillar and enters free glide towards the camera, it quickly goes into 12, then 24 FPS, with the last 5 frames all animated on ones. So not only does the speed literally increase, but your eyes have more information to take in this last fraction of a second. As always, the animators used the extra temporal fidelity of animation to add even more attention to anatomical features like this freaky sideways eyelid that eagles actually have, and I gotta say, I hate the sound effect for this. Laios simply cannot contain his excitement at the prospect of creating a monster, even seconds after wondering aloud if they'd ever see Senshi again. Oh, he's so proud of himself fetching the ingredients. But he's deeply displeased with Marcel's lack of creativity. This is another classic panel. I'm glad she's at least happy with him. But it's the second half of the episode, and particularly the action scenes with the Griffin, where the animators kick it back into high gear and bring back the level of animation hype that's been mostly absent for a bit now. And sometimes the most appropriate animation is no animation at all, because Marcel's lack of imagination also means that these things' wings aren't actually functional, so this is just a single drawing being puppeted around the screen to emphasize the weird 2D cookie cutterness of these creatures. In fact, there's a little note from key animator Chiemi Kurosaki, who did this cut along with a few others from this sequence, telling the other animators to make sure that the bird's face should always look like this, with the beak on the side of its head, and never like this. But nonetheless, she manages to go full method and really get into character, because everything here is pretty much one-to-one from the manga until this panel, where they've decided to give her a little bird beak mouth. Laios finally gets his chance to jelk this thing into an actual monster shape, and while it is the logical choice to mimic the shape of Thistle's wyverns from earlier, it also adds to a list of subtle parallels between Marcel and the Mad Mage. Fascination with power and ancient magic, fear of time and losing people, and now she's literally creating beasts much like the ones that he uses to patrol the dungeon. Well, her version is way cuter though. Look at him! I love how in this cut, the wyvern thingy acts like it's getting used to its new body and learning to fly for the first time. As Marcel tosses it upwards and it jumps with its legs. It's as if there's actually too much speed and the motion is led by its shoulder area, with the head dropping below and getting dragged along. And with its second wing flap, it drops sharply back down before managing to lift its head correctly and lead the charge. And with this cut, it looks like one of the show's most frequent and characteristic key animators is back after a few episodes of absence, because while I don't have technical confirmation for this, that hand position alone, not to mention the detailed shadows in the blindfold, make me think that there's no way this isn't the work of Ichigo Kano. And several other cuts over the next several seconds confirm that he had a big hand in this sequence, from the detail in Marcel's hair in this shot to the blocky geometry of Senshi's hands in this one. Also, it seems like whenever Kano is in charge, the horns on Senshi's helmet get bigger and the curve at the end gets more pronounced. He's by far the most recognizable animator working on this show, and after analyzing more than 20 episodes of it now, there's a certain quality to his work that jumps out at me without even needing to pause or look any closer. I get that some people can find it annoying for the visual style to drastically change depending on who's doing the key animation, and there's definitely something to be said for matching a style and staying on model, but I also think that one of the most interesting parts of all this is seeing the different ways that different people express shape and motion. And I can't help but think that allowing creatives to lean into their own style a bit means that the final product will be less stylistically consistent, but just, I don't know, better quality. For this entire cut, the Wyvern is animated on ones, which makes it feel super smooth and high quality, but because it's a loop, it actually only requires 8 frames of animation, so it's an economical way to make a simple moment like this look very impressive. And you may remember that I complained about the bit in episode 18 where Laios goes dog mode, that while it did a great job of hyping up the moment from Laios' perspective, it didn't do as great of a job juxtaposing that with the absurdity of an outside perspective on what was actually going on. Well, this is exactly what I mean, because structurally this sequence is almost exactly the same as that one, but the in-house trigger crew knows when to pull back and step outside the hype for a moment. Just some incredible smears and doubling here. Homegirl straight up turns into... who is the Hindu goddess with 8 arms? Durga for a second. And this is only visible for a 1/6 of a second, but when we cut back to the Wyvern, it's got an excited little smile on its face that matches Marcel's. We're back to the characteristic snappy timing with exaggerated anticipation and quick movements in this cut, and look at this silly little leg spread lunge motion. This one, likely also by Ichigo Kano, does some incredible work with 3D space as the Wyvern rotates around the outside of this pillar, which is fully animated as well. There's fairly little indication of depth on the pillar itself to show its shape aside from the heavier shadows toward the edges, but the creature brings that sense of depth as it rotates and swings past the camera, its wings hugging the shape of the pillar. I also appreciate this simple little shadow effect used to show the distance from the surface. I feel like you'd more often see this sort of thing on the ground or the surface of water as a plane flies over it, but with the position of Marcel's magic lamp thingies, it even sort of makes sense with the lighting of the scene. There's obviously a ton going on in this sequence. It's insanely ambitious to combine these 4 panels into this one cut, while also adding the element of the interaction with the pillar, which seems to be there but isn't particularly well established or relevant in the manga panels, so all that's to say that some decisions have to be made to help your eye follow the action. For most of this, each element is animated on 2s, but when the griffin snaps its beak, this drawing stays on screen for a full 6 frames, minus the camera shake, which sort of anchors your brain within all this chaos and resets before this big next motion where the whole scene changes direction. And in this final bit, the snow is an important indicator to keep track of the geography of the scene and the motion of the camera. We only stop moving for a split second, but the stretching of the snow particles makes that immediately clear. Then as the creature flies through the griffin's legs, they stretch back towards the camera, and along with the motion lines on the pillar form these 1-point perspective lines. Marcel turns into such a magical girl that she changes the atmosphere of the entire scene for a second, and her hands take on this idealized, simplified, long, slender, and elegant appearance that evokes a 90s type style, which is particularly funny if you compare it to the cut of her hands that I pointed out from the previous episode, which was the stylistic polar opposite. And with some really cool effects animation from Yuki Kikuchi, we're back to reality, and Ichigo Kano is also back with the companion pieces to those earlier 2 shots. In fact, this one reuses the exact same background, same zoom out, even the snow overlay is the same. And while the Izutsumi drawing is slightly different because she was wobbling while she talked in the previous version, it's the exact same drawing of Laios here, and the super strict repetition really adds to the comedy, which is already enhanced by being put into motion. And with a few more incredible action cuts, and some really imaginative thoughts on how a griffin would maneuver its strangely proportioned body mid-flight, I find this one, presumably by key animator Haruki, particularly interesting, where it does a sort of swimming motion to streamline its lion half to follow its eagle half. The crew balances the epic coolness and preposterous silliness that must always be in equilibrium, yada yada yada, all the stuff I said at the start of the video. I can't go into all of it in full detail, but let me know in the comments what stood out to you in the episode. Oh, that's... ugh, I hate that. This close-up is added for the anime. Marcel is understandably upset about this, but to be fair, she did also cold-heartedly squish Laios' creation just a couple minutes ago. They're like two kids at the beach wrecking each other's sandcastles because they each have a different idea about what shape the spires should be. I mentioned Senshi's point grip with the knife at the start of the video, and you'll notice that Laios holds the knife differently, pinching the base of the blade between his thumb and index finger like a true European. It's funny to think that nobody really thought to ask Senshi about his past, given that he literally said when they met him that he had been in the dungeon years before it was discovered. But this marks a major shift in the cast's views of each other as business partners and companions, and it's a big growth moment for Chilchuk of all people to be the one to open up first. Also, surprise, Chilchuk has a wife and kids. Do with that information what you will. I'll see you next time when we learn some more about baby Senshi, and consider subscribing to make sure you don't miss it. And if you want to support the channel, consider checking out the Patreon, where I'm gathering questions for an exclusive Q&A video that I'll try to make once Dungeon Meshi is over, but I need some more cues. And thanks so much to my existing supporters over there, whose names I carve crudely into the wall above my desk and hope they give me enough money to make up for the fact that I'm definitely not getting my security deposit back. Leapico, Mamori, Scrubbin, Katie L, Siege Weasel, Retrohime, Serial Isle, Nutaf, Patrick Davison, Arborix, Lisette MT, Jun, Dr. Yola McSwag, Grav G, Squid Goo, Achu, Austin and Shoji, Julian Francisco, Joe, Daku, and Alex Cervantes, as well as all the other names you're seeing on the screen right now. And thank you for watching.